right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is being live streamed and recorded. And the main purpose of today's meeting is to go over the recent finance audit. And that discussion will be led by Victor Orlando. Good morning, sir.
Good morning and happy Friday to everybody out there. So today's topic is the review of the 22-23 financial audit report and also the single audit report that was completed by our independent CPA firm, BBD. And this morning we have two people here from BBD, Carl Hogan, who's the partner, and also Stuart Morcom, who's the audit manager. And they're going to do a presentation and review the 22-23 audit reports. So I'll turn it over to Stuart or Carl.
We'll kind of break it up.
We'll break this up a little bit. I'll kind of go over some of the highlights. Stuart will kind of go over some of the financial aspects of since he was the one most familiar and did a lot of the work with our staff here on site. But like
Kimberly Garrison.
So like Vic said, this is June 30th, 2023. The good news is what we're going to present here today. I know Vic works really hard on being transparent in terms of where the numbers are going to end up. So these numbers should look very familiar to everybody as we go through them today. But I'm going to start here on page number 1. Obviously, the most important part of the audit report being the independent auditor's report, basically what you're hiring is for. And the most important part of the audit, I would think, in addition, is the top two paragraphs here, the opinion paragraphs, basically stating the numbers presented within this audit report are fairly presented for the year ended June 30th, 2023. During the process, we had little to no any kind of adjustments during our audit process. So the numbers that were presented to us are being reflected in this audit report without any type of audit adjustments on our end. A little bit of a different paragraph. You kind of remember last year that we have a change in accounting principle during the current year. If you remember last year, we had GASB related to the leases. The current year, you implemented a new standard related to subscription-based information technology arrangements, GASB number 96. And if you look in the footnotes in the back, we kind of explained the impact on the financial statements. It's not that material in relation to the overall school district, but at the same time, it was material enough for us to record and to implement that new GASB for the year. So basically what it is if you have a multi-year subscription for software, et cetera, you're recognizing an asset, amortizing that asset, in addition to recognizing any type of liability or future liability that might be over a multi-year. So they kind of amortize and you pay them off at the same time. So it's kind of negligible impact on the financial statements. The other sections of the independent auditor's report, we have management's responsibilities, our responsibilities. These responsibilities have not changed. In the past couple of years, they've kind of expanded on the language within the audit report, but what everybody needs to know, our responsibilities or management's responsibilities haven't changed, just the language within the report. And then the rest of the independent auditor's report is talking about what responsibility we're taking for the different sections of the audit report. The required supplementary information is information that we need to look at to make sure it's consistent with the rest of the audit report, primarily consisting of management's discussion and analysis, and also the actuarial reports that are required to supplement the audit report. We do not provide an opinion on the management's discussion analysis on this. Like I said, we just need to make sure it's consistent with the rest of the audit report. The one thing I'd like to point out, management's discussion analysis follows the independent auditor's report right after the first 3 pages, and that's on pages 4 through 13. And if you're not going to read all 65 pages of the audit report, I really encourage everybody to at least read pages 4 through 13 because you'll get the kind of gist and kind of go over the highlights we're going to talk about here today. I know management that takes the time to make sure that the highlights are included in management's discussion analysis. And then on page 3 up at the top, just there's some summarized comparative information to kind of compare 2022 to 2023 within this audit report. In addition, the supplementary information is information we are taking responsibility for and are providing an opinion on it in relation to the full financial statements. So in the case of Laura Marion, the supplementary information primarily consists of the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So it's part of, as Vic mentioned before, there's a single audit and there's a schedule of federal awards in the back. We need to make sure that's fairly presented in relation to the rest of the financial statements. Also, you'll see some dates are missing there. We're wrapping up some loose ends. We'll get some legal letters and some other loose ends we need to include in our audit file, and we'll get this, wrapped up probably here in January, typically like we usually do. And then, also one other thing I want to point out before we get into the numbers, there's different reporting requirements that management needs to meet. Number one being the annual financial report with the Pennsylvania Department of Education. That's been filed with them in a timely fashion. Also, there's EMA reporting requirements related to your bonds. We'll get that reported or get that uploaded to the EMA website. And then in addition, there's a single audit that gets uploaded to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. And we'll do that also in a timely fashion. You got 9 months to do that, and we'll beat that deadline easily. So, and then one other thing, the pages 4 through 13, that's the management's discussion and analysis here. And like I said, if you're going to read anything, read this in addition to the auditor's report. And then we get to the back of the audit report. There's a summary of our audit findings and so forth. So we'll kind of go over that as we get back there. So, if you want to go.
So yeah, like Carl said, you can look at the management's discussion and analysis as you like, but we're going to go over the financial statements themselves here at the meeting. So those start on page 14. So as a government entity, GASB requires you to do 2 different sets of financial statements. The first set, which comprised the first 4 pages from page 14 through page 17 there. Those are showing you the government-wide statements. So these are basically the statements that GASB has implemented in the past 2 decades to sort of give a picture more like a corporate financial statement that shows your debt and your capital assets. But obviously, when you guys are budgeting, these aren't the financial statements that you're looking at. Those are the next set. But I'd just like to go over these to show you just where your financial position is at in this basis that GASB also requires you to report at. As you can see, you have a very strong capital asset balance due to the many projects that have been going on in the district here. About $500 million. And also this shows the non-current liabilities as well. And you can see that number down there. And for almost every school district in the state, there is a deficit on this financial statement just due to the pension liability, which is part of that non-current liability amount, which is obviously an amount that you're not required to pay out in dollars as a school district, but it is sort of the political football that's been handed to you. So it's been required to report here. But really what we want to look at are the fund level financial statements, which start on page 16. Yeah, page 16. So page 16, we have the balance sheet for the governmental funds. So this shows all of your governmental funds, which is essentially everything but food service. So you have your general fund, capital projects, and capital reserve, and debt service. First thing you probably notice here is your total assets year over year went down significantly there, but you'll also notice that your total liabilities went down significantly. And that was largely just due to timing. As you can see, the cash went down by about 35 million, but that was largely due to the legal settlement that was accrued as of last year. So you can see accounts payable went down about 22 million. So essentially that accounts payable got paid off by cash. But as you can see, as we'll see on the next financial statement, we didn't have a loss really, a very minor a decrease in fund balance. Yeah, we can move on to the next one here, which is on page 18, the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. So this statement on page 18 will show you those same funds, but the actual performance for the year. So in the top section, you have total revenues, and it's broken out in your local sources there to show you your real estate taxes and how those performed year over year, your transfer taxes, And then the big thing here is obviously interest rates went up significantly across the year. So we have earnings from investments went up over $5 million year over year for the governmental funds, which is significant. As you can see, the real estate taxes did go up due to the millage increase. Real estate transfer taxes went down, but that was largely just due to a really good performance in 2022. That's not anything, it's basically going back to levels that it was at before. And then expenditures, we have a detailed schedule in the back for a budget to actual. But expenditures increased consistent with the collective bargaining agreements and expected amounts to increase for salaries and benefits. One thing you'll note down in the other financing sources and uses section, you'll see on the general fund there's a transfer out of 3.5 million and a transfer in on the capital reserve fund of 3.5 million. That was the amount that was approved back in the spring by the board to transfer. And so that was an estimate at the time of what the surplus would be on the general fund. And as you can see, the net change in fund balance there for the general fund after that transfer was a negative 92,000. So that's pretty spot on as an estimate a few months before year end that management made 3.5 million and it ended up being, just 3.4 and change. So that's a pretty spot on estimate for the size of your budget.
Do you mind if I just interject here for a second? I really do want to highlight and thank Mr. Orlando and his team, because given the size and the size of our budget and the way that school district budgets can be unpredictable, I do think that was an incredible estimate. So thank you to Mr. Orlando and his team.
Yeah, I would agree. That's very spot on. For the
I just want to point out too, just to piggyback off what Stuart was talking about there, is that we were kind of talking about the balance sheet there and the decrease in the cash and the decrease in the accounts payable. If you look in that 2022 column, there's that $15 million that hit in the previous year. That just kind of correlates to that 15 million was the amount that was put into accounts payable in the previous year, refunded prior year revenues, and then subsequently paid in the next year. So that just kind of correlates. Hey, it was captured in 2022 at the point of the legal settlement, and then it was actually paid in the next fiscal year, and that was kind of reserved within fund balance. So I just want to make sure that correlation between that summarized comparative information, it kind of gets muddy a little bit because it's kind of capturing all the funds as summarized information. But I just want to make sure that that's captured in terms of, hey, here's where it was recognized, and then the actual physical cash went out the door the next year, and then I wanted to mention. So.
All right, and just to take a quick look at the performance of the other funds, your capital projects fund had a decrease in fund balance of 10.3 million, and those were all expenditures for capital projects as budgeted for in those projects. And the capital reserve fund did have a decrease due to purchases of the buses go through there and other capital projects that are purchased. And that 3.5 million offset that as well. And then the debt service fund had a budgeted decrease to use some of that funding this year to pay off your scheduled debt service amounts. But in the end, you have 28 million in your general fund there as of June 30, 2023. And then beyond this, we have the other financial statements for the proprietary fund, which is your food service fund. That is on page 20 for the balance sheet, and then page 21 for the operations, the net income statement. On page 21, you can see the performance, and you'll see things look quite different for the food service fund this year, just because the free lunch program that was in effect in the prior year is over. So you can see your charges for services, which is your lunch revenue, went from just under $500,000 to over 2.5 million or 2.6 million. So the kids are paying for their lunches again now. More of them are paying for them as opposed to that free lunch program. And you can see that there was a pretty positive change in fund balance there of about 580,000. And you still have a deficit at year end, but that is due to the net pension liability being recorded on the food service fund required by GASB. So that makes up more than that deficit. And beyond this, we have a few more financial statements for the fiduciary funds, the student activities, scholarship, and stuff like that. Nothing really significant to note there. Those funds are all operating as expected. Student activities are providing the revenues and to cover their expenses and such. Beyond this, we'll find the notes to the financial statements. If you're really into this stuff, this is where you'd love to take a good read and find all about the pension liability and long-term debt, stuff like that. But really, there's nothing I really want to point out in there specifically. So we can move past those and head to the single audit section at the end. So the CFA is on page 55 and 56. So that shows all of the federal awards for the year. As an entity that received more than $750,000 of federal funding in the year, we had to do a single audit. So we selected the programs based on our major program determination, and we audited the ESSER program this year, or the ARP program, and we did not have any findings. If you want to actually, so that's where the CFA is, 55 and 56, but the results of our single audit are on the last page, which is 65. So this just summarizes that we didn't have any findings in the single audit. It also summarizes that there weren't any findings in the audit or during our controls testing for the audit. And it shows that Lower Merion was a low-risk auditee due to not having any findings of any kind for the past 2 years. And yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. Is there anything else you wanted to cover, Carl?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, I know we were going back on page 18, and I kind of pointed out the $50 million, but just overall, we don't need to go back to page 15. I just think looking at this statement kind of gives everybody the Lower Merion School District, it's, in a good financial position. It has good reserves in relation to its capital reserve fund and its debt service fund. So it makes your job as a board easier. It gives you that flexibility to be able to, manage your general fund balance through those other reserves, et cetera. So I just think, to continue to, work using the capital reserve and the debt service fund, the capital reserve fund in terms of those projects that you don't necessarily have to go out and borrow debt, and you could use that as a, like you said, use as a tool for the transportation and the buses and so forth like that. And then the debt service fund, every year it seems like you may have a $200 or $300 million budget, but it always seems to come down to a couple of $1 million at the end of the year when you're trying to balance stuff. And it's good to be able to have those reserves to be able to draw upon them to, for budgeting purposes and, being the biggest thing you do on an annual basis. So I just wanted to make sure that's pointed out that, hey, fiscally, when you look at Lower Merion and the liquidity and the cash at year end, that, everything is, looking good, so.
I guess we'll open up to any questions from the board that has for Carl or Stuart.
Yeah, I can go. So, this is new for me, so I'm just trying to figure out the lay of the land here. But in terms of the total debt that the district had, it looked like it's about 10% of our budget goes to debt, servicing the debt, more or less, right? So 30 million or so, and 20 million of that was for principal, 10 million of that was for interest, if I'm reading this appropriately, right? So what is I'd like to know, and probably the community would like to know, given the total outstanding, there's like 220 million or something that's left over still now. What's the short and long-term plan for that? I mean, if we paid off 20 million of principal last year, is that the trajectory that we're looking to maintain? are we, in which case this would be paid off in like, what, 8, 9 years? Or is the goal to bring it down to a certain level and then refinance that as interest rates maybe come down in the coming year? Like, what's the vision for that?
Well, right now, if you look at the one schedule that we have, you can see you're correct. It does stay at that 30 level. That does drop off.
It's at page number 36.
36 of the footnotes. That there's a schedule. As Carl mentioned, the footnotes go for, I don't know, 30 pages or so. So there's a lot of information, and it is a big report. But if you look at that one page, you can see there is a chart in there. You can see over the next, if you scroll down just a little bit, you can see how the debt is 31, 29, 30 million. Then you can see as it drops off as the debt in 2028.
Just show a little bit down.
Maybe shrink.
Yeah, you could see that the series of 2009 falls off. I think that's where you put that 2027. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If you go
just
back up a little bit,
up
sorry.
there, yeah, double page. Yeah, right there. So you can see
Right.
2009. So that's why you're seeing that drop in the 25 to
Correct.
17. And then if you see the final maturity date on the Series A and B of 2009, that's April of 2027. Kind of shows why that falls off.
Yeah, so you can see in 2034, which is what, about 11 years from now, if the debt service stays the way it is, then you'd be fully paid off. To your point about refinancing, so Public Financial Management is our consultant. We constantly look and see as the market changes, and the debt service fund we have has come from refundings from prior years. So we're constantly looking at that. Unfortunately, the way the market is right now, there's just no refunding because we would lose money if we refunded. But we constantly look at that, and I'm constantly periodically talking with PFM about refunding, and there's opportunities that is beneficial to the district, we'll refund it.
You know, when I look at, a superintendent, when I look at the debt that we have to pay off, and I look at the capital projects that we need to do, Mr. Orlando and Mr. Lil are continuing to work on a short-term and long-term capital project. There's something called a wraparound debt structure that we would likely be talking about with PFM over the next couple of months to talk about how we can accelerate a number of capital projects that we have, essential projects, roofs, paving, all those types of things. So we're in a good position. You know, it's the end of the debt service is there. That's not to say that we're going to all of a sudden start, you know, taking on a lot more debt. But there are ways that we can structure new debt that we have to take on that would have minimal impact to the operating budget.
Can I do a follow-up? So you said the key words, if we stay on this path, this is what we're looking at. So do we see in the foreseeable future that path changing? And this might be a question you're not answering until the next meeting, so I understand that, and you can couch it till then, with the new expenses for full-day kindergarten.
So when we think about full-day kindergarten, that does eat up some budget capacity. Part of my superintendent goals for this year is to work with these gentlemen on developing the capital projects plan. So we most likely will be bringing some recommendations to the board, some presentations and recommendations about a blended approach. So using some capital reserve, but also potentially, you know, taking on a little bit more debt to accelerate some projects. To be determined. We're wrapping up the capital plan now, so I would anticipate maybe like in February, March, we would be like unveiling that capital projects plan.
Thanks. I just want to make sure when we're looking at all of this for the community that is listening or watching later, that we realize that this is a snapshot in time with the projection plan that we've had for years, and that as new pieces come in, it affects that. And we have to be thinking 5 years, 10 years, all those pieces. You can keep going, and I have a couple other questions on that same theme.
I just want to say one more point. Given the amount of capital projects that we have to do just to keep our buildings in good condition, to think that we would be able to do all of that work outside or just with the money that we have in reserve right now probably isn't realistic. So I just want to emphasize that point for the community, and that's something that in future meetings we can continue to emphasize that point.
Yeah, thank you.
One thing I'd like to point out too, I know you mentioned about 10%. We audit a lot of school districts and 10% seems to be the sweet spot. You know, obviously there's some school districts that don't have any debt, have less than 10%, but a majority of our school districts have, some are above 10%, but I would say the sweet spot for most school districts, the debt service is in that 10% range. So you're, you know, normal.
Maybe one general thing. For the money that's in the reserve funds, is there an easy place for us or the community to find out what that's allocated, like how much of it is allocated for what future expenses or anticipated needs, and what the timeline for those is?
So that's actually the capital projects plan that we're going to bring forward.
Okay.
We'll put together.
So I couldn't find
Yeah,
an easy
so-
place to access that, and
The capital projects plan we have this amount of money set aside.
Right.
Here's all of the projects that need to be done with projected costs that include contingency, because it's future planning. And then we will have it divided up into years, like year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. And then we'll keep referring to that document. That will make it really clear to the community that sometimes people ask, well, you have this money here, why are you continuing to raise taxes or making cuts on the expense side? And it'll just make it really overt to the community.
correct.
Of all the needs that we have.
That's where I'm going
Yeah.
with this. So that'll be available to people when? Or,
I would hope by February.
okay, great, thanks.
And just as part, we've done that in the past, a 5-year plan, and say what our projects are. Even for the 3.5 million reflected here, we stated exactly what the projects are for. So we did that in a public meeting, and we'll continue to do that.
And again, this is a benefit of coming or watching the budget meetings, because that's when you like unpack where it's coming from. But I just want to echo on that, because for me, it's only been 2 years like totally fully in it. I just really appreciate the work that you've done to say, this is where we're going. We know these things are coming down the road, and we're moving the funds into the right budgets, because in the past, it's gotten us in trouble where we know we needed the money, but we haven't moved it over and allocated it appropriately, and it's just such a level of higher transparency than I saw. Not that you weren't being transparent, but you can see it much more directly now, and it was an echo of what you guys shared earlier, that is happening, it's moving in, and then we're articulating really clearly, this is the game plan with subject to change asterisk at the bottom.
And we also have the new spot on our website called Making Practices Public. And so when we can put a one-pager up there that sort of supplements in everyday language. You know, I let Mr. Orlando do the numbers and he lets me do the everyday language. I'm like, sometimes I'm like, explain that to me like I'm that second grade teacher again. But we can put it up on Making Practices Public, and then that way it's easy to find and overly transparent.
I'm more so, I'm on the slide 8 and looking at we have the federal and state sources, and I'm just wondering, as ESSER funds dry up, and we also had the court case with the funding for school, for thing, and do we have any idea of what the state is going to be doing with funding for next year and how it might affect us?
So I'm only chuckling because the state just finalized the budget the night before last, and we had, at our superintendent's meeting yesterday, we had Sherry Smith, the executive director of PASA, talking about next year's budget. There are a lot of hopes and dreams for next year's budget. The last couple of years, money that used to be in a competitive grant has been moved into something called Ready to Learn that we can count on every year. That funds a number of instructional programs. It'll help offset the cost of universal full-day kindergarten. The last couple of years, there's been money for safety out of PCCDY, Pennsylvania Coalition on Crime and Delinquent Youth, and there's also been mental health under the funding under the American Rescue Plan, ARP. The hope from the governor's office and from at least some of the legislature is to allow there to be predictable funding in our budgets, in the state budget that will come to the district each year, to keep some allocations around those, because in 2008, 9, and 10, when the economy crashed and there was the federal stimulus, a lot of districts used that money to pay for staff so as not to furlough people. And when that money dried up, then there were positions outside of the budget. This time around, districts did a much better job, but 417 of the 500 school districts used ARP dollars for mental health services. And with that money drying up, they're calling it the mental health cliff because those services might not exist for kids. Same thing around safety and security. The last couple of years, we've been getting some money to do things like cameras and door locks and making our schools more secure. There's more work that needs to be done there, and in the past, those have been unfunded mandates. So it'll be interesting to see how all that shakes out in the budget. I have to be honest with you, with how long it took to do this year's budget at the state, I'm not thinking we're going to really have any kind of realistic numbers around the state budget until summer. Unfortunately, after we have to approve our budget. And so that's something through the budget process, for the idea of transparency, we have to be really clear about, because I think we're going to be working in a really unknown space this year.
Okay, I just have a few. So, and I don't know if I'm using the terminology right, cash flow, looking at the cash impact and the drop. I think you referenced the lawsuit and the fund that we were paying out for that. That's not done. That's coming in next year as well. So how does it affect 2 more years? What are we going to see a similar drop? Like, how's that going to look over time?
You're going to see a decrease in the cash at the end of the year, because obviously if we're getting in $4 million less, $4 million this year, current year and 2 more fiscal year, you're going to see the cash come down. I mean, Ms. Pringle, who's here, who helps me out a lot with the cash management, we're constantly looking at making sure we have enough money, and obviously watching our investments, we don't lock things up. So it is, more, more, it's a lot more, we have to be a lot more, diligent with making sure we have the funds and everything. But as of right now, obviously you can see, we should be fine.
Got it. And we'll see that drop the same as this drop this year?
Well, it's going to be $4 million for each next year, so we're going down to $12 million.
Okay, but with revenues coming in, it's still going to be around, okay.
Yeah, so we're watching our flow of revenues, we're pretty good here, our collection rate's been pretty good, and even the economy's kind of, we've been pretty good for the most part, but you never know.
One thing I want to point out too, if you go back to that page number 16, I think it was, and you look at the cash and the cash drop, you just got to remember that right-hand column is summarized. Includes all the funds, so you're seeing that huge drop, and that's just the expending of capital, capital bond money included in there as well. So it's not all the 15 million, but so if you looked at the general fund, it did decrease cash to cash, but that 2022 amount includes the bond money that came in previous year and got spent for BlackRock and so forth. And yeah. So, that's why, if we had this fully comparative, these financial statements would be like this long and everything like that. So we try to summarize it, and you just had that unusual thing there, but. Just to point out that cash didn't just decrease because of that $15 million payment, but it also decreased because of the use of restricted funds.
Yeah. And just to clarify for people that are online that may not know what restricted funds are, restricted funds that are funds that you have in reserve for a certain specific project. Kind of like hold on to them and then release them when the project needs, correct?
Yes, correct, for construction. That's the biggest piece there, yeah.
Perfect, good. Okay, fund balance, general question. The fund balance, is it where it's supposed to be? How do we feel about where it is right now? I feel like I ask this question every year. Do you feel good about it? You feel a little nervous? Like, you can be honest and generic.
Everybody has their own, every school district has their own fund balance.
Makes generic answer.
Yeah. They have their own, everybody has their own theory and how they want to handle their fund balance. In the case of, Laura Marion, you have put away money, obviously for the legal settlement, because you got to put that aside in accordance with the court, and put the $12 million is put aside. Future PSERS obligations, this amount is put away for future increases in PSERS. We had that little dip in the contribution rate in the most recent year, but now it's going to start ticking up again. And I think the current projection, things are going well in the economy, or for investments, not in the economy, but the investments are doing well. So it's projected to go to 38%. So you can maybe in turn use some of that future PSERS obligations to kind of offset the impact of that. And then also the $10 million that you put aside for healthcare benefits. I don't know off the top of my head, Laura Marion, but what we're seeing across all school districts is an increase in cost for healthcare benefits across everywhere. I mean, it's uncanny in terms of almost 33% from 2019 to 2022. So it's a combination of, inflationary factors in addition to, people utilizing the services more. So it's a combination of the two, and it kind of leveled off just some hair this year, whatever like that. And I know people weren't going to the doctors as much with COVID and stuff, but there's definitely impact on school district budgets related to healthcare, and putting that $10 million aside may be able to smooth in any kind of effects related to that in the future. So
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because it's a big jump this year in most organizations, like looking at those percentages going through the roof for healthcare. But there's also a lot of like one-time, I just keep calling it a coupon. That's not the right word, but like, we're gonna drop it this year and give you this rebate.
the holiday, the
Yeah.
holiday.
And so are we gonna see that in a negative effect next year when that rebate doesn't exist?
Possibly. Yeah, you'd be very just prudent in how we use the money.
Yeah.
Because there could be future impacts, yes.
So yeah, we audit CPAS too, and we just see it. It just a lot of people use the holiday this year because of that impact. A lot of those individuals within the consortium did utilize it just because of the increase in the cost. So at some point it is, there's going to be no buffer there. You're required to keep X amount of months still within the CPAS, and they want to see you keep 3 months? Was it 3 months they want to keep in there? So at some point you're going to hit that point where it's 3 months and you're not going to be allowed to use that, draw upon that CPAS balance. So.
Got it.
So just for folks, CPAS is the healthcare consortium that we're part of.
Perfect, great. And that's, again, all these like hidden costs that are fluctuating that like make this up and try to understand.
Yeah, so when you actually have committed funds or restricted funds, the definition is those are for one-time non-recurring expenditures, such as to smooth in the increases in PSERs and for those one-time non-recurring healthcare or OPEB expenditures that you may have. So you've been lucky that you haven't had to use them, but you never know, they're there. Like that's what I was kind of talking about before. You have flexibility in that you have this funding there for these future costs.
Okay, 2 more quick questions. One, the lunch increase in revenues. If that was, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought it was offset in past years because of ESSER funds, which would have and so even though there's an increase in direct revenues from the community members, there's still a decrease in grant funds that will come in. Is that correct?
In the current year, that's correct. The amount of money that was coming in being paid by families for lunches went up, but the grant revenue decreased. So it flipped from last year. Last year, the grant revenue was significantly more than the amount that the families were paying, and this year it flipped the other direction.
So it's not just a wash, because that was my question.
No,
It was kind
no,
of
it's
a
not.
wash. It's not a
Yeah,
wash, it's
no.
a drop.
Overall, I'm not sure.
Well, just 2022, you had that additional subsidies. So not in addition, you had the child nutrition program where it's a reimbursement basis for, those families that are, well, in 2022, everybody got the reimbursement, whatever like that. But also there was that supply chain assistance in addition to, what was the other one? There was 2 of them, supply chain assistance and the different subsidies that they gave.
Operating.
Oh, yeah, and operating. So because if you remember, this was kind of just to help with the impact of inflation. Everybody was having a hard time getting products, and talk to food service directors, and basically they were just taking whatever showed up on the truck because it was hard to get stuff, and the cost of everything was going through the roof. So the state built in these subsidies through these these COVID monies to kind of help out with that. So those monies are falling off as well. So what you're going to see in 2022 is a lot of school districts had, as you can see, for 2022 on page 21, you had a $1.5 million surplus because of these additional monies that came through. So 2023 is more in line with what we're going to expect going forward.
Got it. Okay. Last question, then we can turn it to Kimberly. And this is more for you moving forward. It is very hard when you're watching this online to especially if you're not an accountant, to keep up with what line you're talking about. And so Vic, I think you did something for me last year, which I thought was really helpful, where you just kind of like made it real clear, either by highlighting or by like line 22, look there. Like, I love a good budget that has the left-hand column justification with the numbers on it, because all the words kind of look the same, so you're like quickly going. Yeah. And you guys have been living this for so long. So as we move forward, just to make sure again, when you're not stuck in budgetville, it's harder to keep up. Thanks. Kimberly? She was on, she was off. Tech issues.
Kimberly, you there? Any questions, Kimberly?
And we can text her as a backup, because sometimes we've had people, I think Peter did it last time, he was talking and asking questions and didn't know he was muted. Back to you.
Can I, if I could just make one quick comment? I just want to thank the administration, because, this, obviously, I'm the business manager, but it
I am here,
Oh,
Terry.
okay. Do you have any
The phone
questions?
was acting weird. Yeah, well, first I want to say thank you. This has been a very comprehensive report. Thank the LMSB team as well, Mr. Orlando. So it's very comprehensive. Great. My one question is around full-day kindergarten, and I don't know that this was fully answered, at least for me. Will full-day K require a tax increase for the community?
Most definitely. I don't think that we could onboard such a significant program without a tax increase. So the budget for next year will, on Monday night, we're asking the board to approve the resolution, the Act 1 opt-out resolution, saying that we will keep the tax increase at or below the Act 1 index. My early look is that we're going to need an increase at the Act 1 index in order to make sure that we fully fund not just full-day program, but all of our programs at the level that we're currently at.
Okay, and so is the meeting on Monday, that will be broken down so that everyone can understand like what that liability, that tax liability might be for the average property owner in Lower Merion?
Yeah, so it'll be part of my superintendent's report. So the Act 1 index is 5.3% this year, and that number is really derived by economic conditions. And the Act 1 index usually lags about 18 months behind the economy. So this is the highest that the Act 1 index has been ever. But I'll tell you, yesterday at my superintendent's meeting, we did a quick pulse of districts. Most districts, there are, I think, about 7 districts that are going to be seeking exceptions to the Act 1 index in Montgomery County, and the rest of the districts will be at or very near the index because of things, large-scale program implementation, healthcare costs, pension costs, special education costs, a lot of post-pandemic ramifications around our educational programming. But we can have it broken down. We can have that number about what the average taxpayer could expect, for sure.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And Carrie, you asked all the other questions I wanted to.
So I just want to just make one quick comment. So just as I said before, this is not, it's a team that puts this report together. And I want to just thank the administration. Obviously, they work hard also with their budgets. As Dr. Yanni said, I would say my team, but the business office, I just want to acknowledge them, particularly the gentleman sitting in the front row there, Chris Stoffier, who does the yeoman's work of putting the statements and doing all the accounting work. Ms. Pringle, who's next to me, also does a great deal as far as cash management and a lot of the some of the accounting work. But in addition to that, also our purchasing individual, Patricia DuPont, handles our purchasing and our accounts payable, Debbie Williams and Veronica Miller. Also want to mention Bianca Barnes, who left us last year, was here for most of the year. Acknowledge her, and also our payroll, Peggy Karcher and Melissa Servo, and also Carol Corey, who left us also. But I just want to recognize those, that they do a great job, and that's how we were able to get, I think, a very good report here from the audit team. So I just want to recognize them.
Okay. All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for this morning. If there's nothing else, we'll adjourn the meeting till next month. Thanks.
You might want to mention that there is no community members here too.
Yeah,
For
so
the public watching.
there are no community members here with questions today. So, thanks, folks.